What's going on, Sales Hacker community? Welcome to another Sales Hacker webinar. So we've got a wicked topic today. It is how to increase conversion rates by 580% with a sales conversation roadmap. So big, bold claims. There's been a lot of buzz around this one. We've actually had over 1,100 people register. So thank you everyone for the support. It means a lot. But before we dive into it and I introduce our awesome guest, just a few quick housekeeping matters. So the webinar will be recorded. So if you need to jump off for whatever reason, or you want to share it out with a colleague after, we'll make sure that we send you the recording once we finish up today. And if you haven't been on one of our webinars before, we do like them to be super interactive. So I'll be kind of fielding questions throughout. So make sure you jump on the little control panel, should be on the right-hand side. Ask relevant questions throughout. We'll be getting to as many as humanly possible. And yeah, as a matter of fact, if you want to go to the panel now, let me know your name, your title, where you're from. Maybe we'll do a few fun, quick shout outs before we start. But as people are doing that, I want to officially introduce our guest today, David Kirkjian, the founder of Master Messaging. David, welcome to the Sales Hacker community.
Hey, thank you. Super excited to be here speaking with the group.
We're pumped to have you. Okay, so I want to add a little bit of color. I always like to give a background of our guests. So David is a 35-year sales veteran with success both as a quota-carrying rep and a sales leader in companies like Bell South and Career Builder. Actually an engineer by education, David sought after and discovered the secrets to his success by actually exploring behavioral psychology and understanding the science of human decision making. And in 2012, he founded Master Messaging to help clients increase their revenue by mastering the ability to elevate their value. I love it. It's crazy. I found so many amazing sales leaders have engineering backgrounds. Any idea why that is, David? Have you found that as well?
Yeah. I think there's tremendous value in understanding how the world works, again, from an engineering standpoint. But where you see successful sales professionals really shine with an engineering background, it's being able to take the complex and make it simple. So I think the combination of those communication skills and a deep technical understanding or an understanding of how the world works, I think those two combined are fairly unique and certainly very valuable.
Definitely. And now before I hand over the reins to you, let's definitely see who's joining us today. So we have Carl Dupolt, hello from Exton. We have Andy Blitz from Detroit. Tyler Benson, sales training manager out of Minnesota. We have Adrian Barry from Proposify. Tyler, Carlota, lots of good people here. Oh, we got the UK in the house as well. So awesome. But yeah, without further ado, David, do you want to kick us off? Let's get into it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do hope that as we're going through the content and the materials that we've prepared, please serve up questions. We'd love to make this as interactive as possible and do that throughout the call. So here's what we're going to be covering. The most important sales conversation that your reps are having is that first conversation. We're going to talk about the problem or challenge with just winging it on a discovery call. If you can't communicate value, I know this is a no-brainer, but you're not going to be making the sale. The opportunity to certify your reps on the content of a proven discovery call checklist. And then we're going to close with an example of how one of our clients increased their conversion rates by up to 580%. So obviously, the most important sales conversation that your reps are having is the first one. It's that first impression. If that's not strong, if there's not value that's being communicated in that initial conversation, there's no way that you're going to get to a demo, to a proposal, or any of the other stages of your sales process. I'm actually reminded as a bad example of conducting a discovery call or a first call, I had the opportunity to speak with the CEO of a sales enablement company And the whole purpose of the conversation really was to understand what each of our respective companies do and to see if there was an opportunity to introduce each of our companies into our client base. So I get on the call with this CEO, and we're 5 minutes into the call, and the only thing that's happened is he's asked about 8 or 9 qualifying questions. Things like, well, what market do you serve? How big are your clients? How many sales reps are represented in the clients that you serve? And I quickly got the impression, wow, this does not bode well for a partnership because he's just asking a lot of questions that are really self-serving and really
Hmm.
just all about him. And so at that point, I just raised my hand and I said, look, dude, it's obvious in the way that we're communicating with each other. This would not be a valuable partnership. So let's just agree to part ways. So, think about it. Your first opportunity to make an impression is on that first call. And you can't leave it to chance.
Right.
And what makes it even more important is there's so much noise in the marketplace right now. I mean, think about where we are in our history. There's more information. You've got social media, you got tweets, you got LinkedIn, you got emails, you've got all of this noise that makes it so difficult to engage the prospects that you'd love to speak to. As a matter of fact, the American Marketing Association says that an average consumer is exposed to up to 10,000 brand messages a day. So it's becoming more and more difficult to reach those decision makers with that type of activity going on. And then the Online Marketing Institute says that it takes an average of 7 to 13 touches to convert a cold outreach to a prospect that's willing to get with you on the phone. So why are the reps winging it with that type of backdrop? Well, I suspect, and again, this is just me making an observation based on the 30 plus years of either leading or being a sales rep. Here's my observation. Number one, I think sometimes as sales professionals, we have so much confidence in our product, in our service, that we have this belief that if we can get on the phone with somebody and just share enough about who we are and what we do, that'll win the day. They'll hear
Hmm.
that and they'll go, oh, that's amazing. Yes, let's have another conversation. So sometimes that overconfidence in your product or service can lead you to think, well, that's all I need to do is get on there and talk about that.
Hmm.
Sometimes I think it's a matter of history. So we've got BDR teams, we've got marketing organizations that are doing their best to serve up quality leads. And let's be candid, not all leads are the same. Not all first conversations are the same. Some are really, really good, and some are not. But it's because of the variety of the leads that I think sometimes we have the thought there's other places where I can spend my time and have a bigger impact. So time becomes one of the more critical factors in why people are winging it. And
Hmm.
so the challenge in that is you only get one first conversation. And in the first few minutes of the conversation, you've got to communicate enough value so they'll agree to a more in-depth conversation.
Right.
And so the lack of success, man, it can absolutely lead to the blame game. And we've seen this before. You've got the sales reps that are winging it. It's not getting to an expanded conversation or a demo. And so the sales professional looks at the BDR team or marketing organization and says, hey, it's not my fault. It's the leads.
Hmm.
Marketing looks at the rep and goes, hey, it's your fault. It's your lack of business acumen or preparation. But the bottom line is nobody's making their number.
Right.
Now,
And
at,
David, just to quickly jump in there, because I think
sure.
one of the, I guess the flip side to winging it is these really structured, qualifying acronyms, like people who are trying to just, walk you down. I always call it, when you're bowling and there's the gutters and people are just trying to walk you down this pathway to hit a strike. What are your
Right.
views on those qualifying acronyms? They've been around forever. There's a million of them, but like things like that, for example, do you think those are good things to help you on a discovery call, or is that distracting from you being present in the call?
I think it's good from a general standpoint. And when I say general, yes, those are all good things in BANT. They need to have budget, authority. It needs to the timeline needs to be right. So I get all of that,
Hmm.
but there are so many times in my career and in teams that I've led where they've successfully navigated the sales process. Sometimes starting with a person that doesn't have the authority or the person that doesn't have the budget. So
Hmm.
as long as you don't treat it as a hard and fast rule, hey, if you don't meet these four qualifications, I'm not talking to you. I think it's good to have it as a loose and general idea. But the other interesting thing, they may not have budget, but if you execute this first call in the way that you should and communicate enough value,
Hmm.
who's to say that they then aren't provoked to go and get budget?
Right.
So yeah, again, as a general framework, sure. As a hard fast rule, it has to meet this. No, no, that it just doesn't work.
Yeah. Great points. Yeah, and definitely with the pace of innovation and everything accelerating so quickly, a lot of the budget that you'll be fighting for might be allotted to something else. You may have a totally new industry or service to provide that people don't know about. So
Yeah,
that's
yeah. I
great.
mean, the
Point.
same thing's true with need. So
Hmm.
how many prospects do you speak to that they already know that they need what you have?
All right. Yeah. Not a whole lot. That's your
No.
job. We'd be out of a job if they all were like, "Hey, I need that."
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
No, but great question.
Hmm. Awesome.
So, so this blame game, there's another casualty in winging it, and that's the poor prospect.
Hmm.
So, one of the things that was really popular years ago was this dynamic of asking a lot of questions up front, and there was a twofold purpose for doing that: to qualify, and then to also learn more about the person that you're speaking with. But in today's world, executives they just do not want to play 20 questions. They get the sense when you're peppering them with a bunch of questions, or you've got this huge deck that is communicating everything that you do. They get the sense, wow, this conversation really isn't about me. It's
Right.
about them. It's about the product, the service, the company. And the poor prospect, they've got to live through these, a couple of times a day because they're on the receiving end of multiple sales conversations. So there's a wonderful opportunity to be structured and to be prepared in a way where they get off the call and they go, wow, that's
Hmm.
that's how you conduct a first conversation.
Yeah. I think it comes down to that preparedness thing that you just said, right? Like if you're, I know for me, when I'm on the flip end and I'm a buyer, when I get probed with all these questions, especially that we live in the information age, 80% of the questions they're asking me, you can find on the internet, like
Right.
how much, you know, it's all there, right? So it's just you putting the onus on me to provide the information rather than doing your homework up front, and spending the 20 minutes to prepare for the call.
Yeah. 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 So here's the last casualty in all this. It's the poor sales leader. So we've seen, seasoned sales teams with first call conversion rates in the single digits, and they've got a great product. They've got a great SDR team or marketing organization that's providing plenty of these first conversations, but they're not converting into sales. They're not converting into the latter stages. And so the poor sales leader, their job's in jeopardy. They're stressed out. They're having to answer to the C-suite, for their performance. And that may be one of the reasons why in this Gong IO study, they've seen the average tenure of a VP of sales slide from 26 months to 19 months. That's horrible.
Hmm.
So what can sales leaders do? Well, certainly they can certify their reps on the content of a proven first call playbook. So why? Why a first call playbook? Well, it gives you the opportunity to open a conversation and not a product or feature monologue or dump. And so what reps need is a framework that they can remember, they can live in, one that gives the prospect ample opportunity to respond and be a part of this conversation. So the truth is whether you have a quick transactional sale or a long complex sale, the first conversation should be structured in a way that your prospect perceives tremendous value and predictably not only agrees to a follow-up, but asks for a follow-up, asks for a next meeting. So it also needs to be simple enough that the most junior BDR can see results quickly, or it needs to predictably convert so the senior sales reps on your team will adopt and execute. So we want to introduce you to the sales conversation roadmap. So this framework on the first call has produced amazing results with our clients that we'll talk about just a little bit later in the webinar.
Awesome.
So I've got goals up here. I'm going to walk you through kind of a progression in this framework. But before you start communicating the goals of the individual that you're speaking with, keep in mind that every meaningful conversation starts with understanding the world of the person that you're getting ready to communicate with. So again, it requires some preparation if you really want to start the conversation from there. And one of the first things that you need to do is just a brief introduction. And when I say brief introduction, obviously introduce who you are, the company that you work for, but please also provide 2 or 3 sentences to describe what your company does. In our work, we've had the opportunity to listen to and review hundreds of recorded first conversations. And nothing's more frustrating than to be listening to one of these calls and 20 minutes into the call, hear the prospect say something like, hey, we're 20 minutes into the call and I still don't really understand what you guys do.
Oh no.
Yeah.
You don't want that. You don't want that.
No, your heart just sinks. I mean, again, as a consultant, as I'm listening to this, I'm like, oh, wow, that's horrible.
And where do you think that comes from? That's just, I guess, because the rep or the account executive is so caught up in their day to day, and they live, eat, and breathe their product that they're just making assumptions.
I really do think that's it. It's the curse of knowledge.
Right.
It's just knowing what you know about your product, about your company, about the market that you serve. And sometimes when we have this curse of knowledge, we don't take the time to think about it or look at it from another perspective than our own.
Right.
So again, brief introduction. Hi, my name is, I work for, what we do is, and then again, 1 or 2 sentences. That's not when you would want to go into any kind of great detail about what you do. And so after this introduction, then you want to communicate some of the common goals. Now, this is where the sales rep has to understand you talk to prospects every day. You talk to your customers every day. You should have a deep understanding of what is going on inside their world. Actually, you should have more insight and understanding than the prospect that you're speaking to because of the variety of companies that you talk to. So don't get on a call and start asking them what they want to achieve. Don't ask them what their goals are, because all that communicates to your prospect is you don't really understand their world. You don't really get them. So what you want to do is start the conversation with, hey, as we talk with other leaders like yourself, as we talk with other business executives like yourself, here's some of the things that we're hearing that they want to accomplish. And by communicating that way, the person that you're speaking to starts to get a sense, wow, you really get me. Wow, you really understand my world. And if you want to take it to a whole nother level, here's a pro tip. So look up a job description for a similar company in a similar role and see what they've communicated in that job description as the goals or objectives for that role. And then you can use that as you're communicating with this prospect. Hey, in working with other executives like yourself, here's some of the goals that we see that they're trying to accomplish.
I love that tip. That's a great one. So the different personas that you sell into, go and read their a job posting and read the goals and objectives, and that will kind of get you thinking, especially if you're new in a role, get you thinking of how that buyer is thinking and what they're focused on every day. I think it's an awesome tip.
Yeah. And what you're doing is the more understanding that you have about the world of the person that you're communicating with, the more opportunity you have to communicate empathy and start to build trust and rapport with the individual that you're communicating with. And so that can happen with challenges as well. Again, don't say, hey, what keeps you up awake at night? Or what are the top 3 challenges that you face? Again, that's part of the whole 20 question routine. And they're just going to look at you and go, why don't you know? I mean, you talk to people like me all the time. Why don't you know my challenges?
And that's when their guard goes up too, right? Because that's It's become such a traditional sales question. Now their response is going to be that traditional way that they respond to salespeople because they're viewing you as kind of that lumping you in with all the other salespeople that they've talked to before.
Yeah, yeah, it's a great way to telegraph, hey, I'm selling you now.
Yeah, yeah,
I'm looking for you to answer a question with a
yeah,
problem, and as soon as you give me a problem that I can solve, guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to jump on it and I'm going to
jump on.
start selling you.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. So again, do lead with challenges that you know. And again, sales professionals are experts. They talk to the same personas, day in and day out. So you should know the challenges. And here's another great pro tip: do some research. Go to Gartner, go to Forrester, go to these, third-party consultancies that are doing, deep research, and see if they've, in their research that they're doing, see if they've identified the challenge in your prospects world. Because if you can communicate, hey, according to Gartner, 70% of your employees are actively disengaged from the work that they do. That has so much more credibility than you saying, hey, you've got a problem with employee engagement. So look for that third-party validation, and share it. And then there's also this whole social currency thing. When you share an insight like that somebody else hasn't heard before, it
hmm
provokes them to want to remember it and then share it with somebody else. Hey, I was on a call with this sales professional earlier today. You know what he told me? He told me that 70%, blah 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 blah. So insights are super important in this part of the conversation because it conveys credibility, but it also conveys information that they may not know.
right, right. And using insights through experts, not just yourself.
Right, right. Because again, the prospect that you're talking to, they know that you're going to serve up challenges. And if it's just you saying, hey, you've got a problem or you've got a challenge, they know it's a little self-serving because you're going to turn right around and talk about how you can solve that challenge. So when you use a third party, they're like, oh, this is a real problem. Oh, yeah, I didn't know that.
hmm
So insights are incredible in this part of the conversation.
Yeah. And just quickly going to the audience here. So George Garcia just missed the third-party companies that we mentioned. So Gardner is a great one. Forrester. Any other ones that you have, David, that you go to?
Now, those are the two in the technology space, but you know
Yeah.
what? For every market, there tends to be again somebody that's a expert about that market.
Yeah.
So it should be easy enough for sales reps for their market to just Google, hey, who are the industry experts? Who are the people that are looking at trends and insights for our market? And it should be easy enough to find.
Yeah. Great. Thanks for the question, George.
All right, so hey, communicating goals and challenges, not enough, because you also have the opportunity to communicate what those challenges mean. So it's one thing to say to a sales leader, hey, if a sales leader can't hit their revenue goals quarter after quarter because they can't move their prospects through the sales process, you can communicate what that means. So it means reps won't be successful. And if reps aren't successful, guess what they do? They quit. And if they quit, that means the sales leader has a hole in their team that's not producing sales. And I have yet to meet a sales leader that was able to go back to the CEO and go, hey, I lost two team members because they weren't successful. Can you reduce my quota by 20%? It doesn't work that way, right?
Unfortunately. Yeah.
No. So it's not enough just to say, hey, you've got a challenge. Telegraph to them what that challenge means. And one of the other reasons for doing this is that the behavioral psychologists have found that if there is no emotion in the conversation that you're conducting with a prospect, they're not going to remember it. And here's why. Emotion leads to memory. So if I were to ask everybody on this call, hey, where were you at on 9/11? Everybody would be able to tell me in detail, I was here, here's what was going on, this is what happened.
hmm
But yet if I asked the audience, hey, what did you have for lunch 2 weeks ago?
hmm
You've got the folks out there that eat the same thing every day, and they'd be able to answer that question. But most everybody else is going to be like, yeah, I have no idea.
Yeah.
And the whole reason for that is there was no emotion attached to the lunch that they had. Well, the same thing's true for the conversations you're having with your prospects. If they're not experiencing some emotion around the pain and the challenge that exist in their world, it's pretty unlikely a day or two later they're going to remember any of the main points of the conversation that you had in your discovery call.
Right. Yeah, I
So
think that can be a difficult thing to do for sure. As a sales rep, is convey that emotion. So I don't know if you're getting to it, but I would love to know some tips and tricks for bringing that out in prospects when you're having these calls.
yeah, I think one of the best ways to do this. So we've covered, hey, you've got the introduction, you've communicated typical goals for the persona or the role of the individual you're speaking to. You've talked about the challenges. You've telegraphed some of the impact.
Hmm.
There's a wonderful question to ask at this point in your conversation, and that is, you've just communicated all these things, and you say, hey, that's what we're seeing and hearing from other executives like yourself. I'm curious, what does that look like in your world?
Hmm.
It's a wonderful open-ended question. It communicates that you actually value their opinion or their insight, but more importantly, it gives them the ability to give voice to, yes, those challenges that you communicated, one and two, absolutely. The impact, absolutely. But you know what? We're also challenged with this, here's some other things going on. So
Hmm.
it's at this point in your discovery call that you can ask what I refer to as high impact questions. So they're telling you, okay, we've got this challenge. Great. Well, don't just go from the challenge into the next section of the call. At that point, ask them, so what have you tried to solve that problem?
Right.
Again, another great question, because here's what you're going to learn. Have they tried a competitor? Are they currently looking at a competitor? Have they tried to solve this internally? And then ask them, well, so how did that work? And again, they're going to give you the detail. And they're not talking to you because it worked. They're talking to you because it didn't work. And again, they're hearing themselves talking about how this problem hasn't worked. And then there are impact questions that you can ask. So, okay, I get that. So what's the impact if you're not able to solve this problem? What's the impact on your customer? What's the impact on your team? What's the impact on your role? So don't just hurry through this. This is one of the most important stages of this discovery call, because it really does give you the opportunity to ask questions that, to your point, Scott,
Hmm.
allows them to really experience the pain and the emotion of what's going on in their world today.
Right. That's awesome. I like it.
You can even weave in some of your qualifying questions, because I know obviously you've got to do that in this
Hmm.
initial discovery call. You've got to get to, are they a good candidate? So one of the things that we'll ask in this stage of the discovery call with our prospects is, so what have you tried to solve this first call conversion rate? And they'll give me some things. Well, how many of your reps currently are on plan? How many are not? And so by asking that question, I'm inadvertently getting the answer to a qualifying question for us, which is, how big is your sales team? Without just asking, how big is your sales team?
Yeah.
So there are ways to ask impact questions that actually serve as qualifying questions, but your prospect doesn't even know that. They're just thinking they're involved in a conversation.
Right. I like it. I like it.
Now, this next step, again, super critical in getting to this next step. But before I go there, it's worth noting, one of the hallmarks of a successful discovery call or first conversation is communicating high value. But that begs the question, do you understand how a human being actually perceives value? What's going on inside their head? How does a human being perceive value? And it's interesting because I've been in the sales world for 35 years, and I've been told really from like the first year of selling, hey, David, sell based on value,
Yeah.
because value solves several really big challenges in the sales world. If you communicate high value, you don't get beat up on price. You communicate high value, it creates a sense of urgency to act now instead of waiting later. So when we get asked questions like, hey, how do you overcome the objection of, I'm not ready, I'm going to wait? You can't. You just didn't communicate enough value.
Hmm.
How do you overcome a price pushback objection? Well, you can discount, but what they're really communicating to you is you didn't communicate enough value to justify the price point.
Right.
So it's interesting. We've been told as sales professionals, communicate value, but very few people really understand how a human being perceives value.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Daniel,
Let's break that down because that has to be one of like the buzzwords of the last, it's 5, 10 years is this concept of value. And
yeah.
I've yet to kind of get a succinct definition of what this esoteric value thing that we're all supposed to be creating is. So I'd love to hear your breakdown on it.
Yeah, actually, it's not mine.
Okay.
So Daniel Kahneman, he's one of the foremost renowned behavioral psychologists in the world today. Some of you may
Cool.
be familiar with his book that he released several years ago called Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow.
Yeah. Yeah. Great book.
But what a lot of people don't know is Daniel Kahneman won a Nobel Prize in economics in 2002. Now think about that. Behavioral psychologist has nothing to do with that. Well, I shouldn't say nothing to do with economics, but his focus and his education is all in behavioral psychology. But yet he won the most prestigious award in economics. And the reason for that, one of the reasons for that, is he cracked the code on how human beings perceive value. And the way that human beings perceive value, it's in a contrasting worldview. Literally, this is what your world looks like without our product or service. This is what your world could look like with our product or service. And however dramatic and stark you can make the contrast between those two worldviews will cause the person that you're communicating with to perceive value. So this contrasting worldview is being accomplished in the structure that you see on the diagram. And so the very next step, you need to start painting a picture of what a better tomorrow would look like with your product or service. So here's how you do that. You notice the little VP flag showed up as well. So VP is not value proposition, it's value position. And the reason that it's value position is that a couple of years ago, I would have a sales rep in one of our workshops raise his hand and go, "Hey, our value proposition is this." And I just looked at him and I said, "Why don't you know?" And he goes, "What do you mean?" I said, "Why don't you know if your company has value, if your product has value?" And he goes, "No, it does." And I said, "Well, why are you proposing it?" And he goes, "Oh, I see what you're saying.
Mhm.
If you're absolutely certain that your product or service represents value in the world of your prospect, take a position around it. Let that be the focal point of the conversation." So it's a simple definition. A value position is your unique ability to solve the problem that exists in your prospect's world. And if it's not unique, then pick the thing that you're known for or the reason why you win. So don't spend a lot of time talking about other ancillary things. Focus the conversation around your unique value. And the way that shows up in this conversation is you paint a picture by saying, "Hey, what if you could do this? Imagine if you could do this." And then tell them what they can do differently as a result of using your product or service. And so those represent value position statements. And we actually encourage sales professionals identify what the value position statements are for this persona or for this individual before you ever get on the call. Because you absolutely want to nail that. For a sales leader, what if you could predictably hire and train new reps to start selling in 6 weeks instead of the 3-month ramp that you face today? What if they could taste success so early that they'd be confident in representing and selling other products and services that you represent? And finally, what if you could do that in a way where you could expand into different markets in different cities because you have a predictable process that's going to create success for these reps? Those would be great value position statements for sales leaders.
Hmm.
But for each of you on this webinar, you're going to have to sit down and just answer the question: what can they do differently as a result of your unique solution? And then that has to show up at this point in the conversation. And by describing them what they can do differently, then you're starting to create this contrasting worldview.
I love that. That's a huge, huge takeaway. And I love that because it paints it very visually as well. This kind of contrasting worldview where you're trying to take them and get them in this world and then, show them the light or the better version and just work on that. I think it's an excellent way to showcase value. And we actually have a super interesting question that I'm curious about. This one's from Klaus Folk, and it's asking, do you recommend articulating or quantifying the potential value, but in a financial aspect in the first discovery call, or would you wait to the follow-up visit? Because there's value and then there's a monetary value.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I would wait until another conversation or further into the sales process. And here's why. Again, from a behavioral psychology standpoint, two different behavioral psychologists, one in 2002, one in 2004, proved what we long suspected about how human beings make decisions. And they make decisions based on meaning and emotion, and then justify the decision with logic and reason. So a financial justification would fall more in the category of a logical reason. And there has to be an opportunity to connect with them emotionally and create this contrasting worldview and this value, and communicating with them. Sometimes what if you could, what if you could work with this software program in such a way that it didn't create all these questions that allowed you to get home on time and spend more time with your kids out on the soccer field? I mean, that's a very emotional value position statement. So you have to connect with them emotionally. You have to give them the emotional and meaningful reason for doing business with you, then give them the logical. And here's why I know that's right. And I'm sure there are a number of people on this call that have done this before. I had a sales team that was selling digital X-ray technology in the dental world back in 2001, 2002, when it was fairly new. Mm-hmm. There was a rock solid ROI for taking the old film-based imaging in the dental practice and using digital instead. Rock solid. Typically a 4-month payback, and after that, they could put easily $100,000 to their bottom line. And I can remember having a conversation with the lead dentist of a dental practice down in Orlando, where I did the ROI. I didn't do any of this. I just did the ROI. Hey, here's an ROI calculator. We're going to tell you ROI. And it was 4 months, 100,000. I said, do you agree with what's in that spreadsheet? He goes, yeah, I think you're being conservative. I'm like, great. So you want to put this on a credit card, or how do you want to pay? And he just looked at me and said, no, I'm not ready to buy. And at that point in my career, I couldn't understand why. Why would somebody turn down $100,000 to their bottom line? It's because there wasn't any meaning or emotion. So there needs to be some meaning or emotion, and then you can follow that along with an ROI or a financial outcome that is going to make an impact. Great question.
Yeah, great question, Klaus. And I'll take that one step further, because this is a challenge as well, because I've known that, the emotion thing, but what happens when they push the agenda on you? And do you have any actionable tips or tricks? Like, do you sidestep price if they go out and ask you? How do you kind of prolong that and build that emotion if they're going straight for the ROI?
Yeah, one of the common responses to, well, give me a ballpark. I get. So we're at this point in the conversation. You've painted a good picture of what my world could look like. So give me a ballpark. And again, my answer is for what? They're like, well, for your solution. And I'm like, I have no idea what that looks like for you. I mean, so we had this come up with a small construction company here in Atlanta. She asked that question, and I was like, it could be 15,000, it could be 100,000. It's kind of like buying a car.
Right.
First you have to know what you need and what you want. We're not at that stage in the conversation, but we'll get there shortly. So I think there are a number of ways that you can communicate back to them. It's just too premature, because if I telegraph a price and you're not clear about the value and clear about what you would have to do in your world to get that value, then why are we even having this conversation about what it costs?
I like it. Awesome.
So after you've painted this wonderful contrasting worldview, again, you've got the challenges and the impact on the left, and you're painting this picture of what they can do differently. Guess what the prospect wants to hear next? They want to hear that what you just said is true. So they want some proof. So you have to be able to back up this worldview, this painting of this picture of what their world would look like. And there's a really simple way to do that. So you go, hey, what if you could do this? Imagine if you could do this. What if you could do this? Well, you can, And that's exactly how we were able to help XYZ company achieve whatever the outcome is through our unique solution. And there's even an opportunity, these mini proof sources or these mini case studies, these one sentence case studies, you can create a number of those, again, for different personas, for different markets, and just land it right there. And so what you have to pay attention to is this is not the opportunity to get into a deep dive of how it happens, how your product works. Give them enough, again, just so they understand, oh, I get that. And they're going to be asking follow-up questions. Well, how would it work here? Or how would we do this? That's your opportunity to say, look, that we've only got 30 minutes for this call. What you're asking me is going to take a lot longer to explain how you can have this value in your world. That's why we typically schedule a follow-up meeting, and here's what would be accomplished there. When could we do that? So when you get to the proof source, again, that's not the opportunity to, to go into great detail as to how your product works. It really is just to succinctly state, we've done this before. We did it with this company. This was their outcome. You can have this too.
Yeah. And so we've got Tess O'Brien from the audience here, and she wants to know a little bit more about, Jackson, can you please repeat the one sentence template? So I think she's talking about the one sentence case studies. And how do you kind of word that? Is that just, we've worked with XY company to see benefit Y?
Yeah. I'll give you an example. We worked with one of our clients here in Atlanta, specifically on the first call conversion because it was so low. So at this point, if I were having a conversation with a sales leader, I'd go, look, you can, and here's why. It's exactly what we were able to do with, and I'm not going to say the name of the company, with XYZ software company. We helped them achieve a conversion rate of 47% on their first call through our first call playbook. So that's how we're able to help insert company name, achieve whatever the outcome or metric was, in this case, 47% conversion rate through what was the product? Well, in this case, it was a first call playbook.
Love it. And you're shooting those through kind of throughout the conversation. You're putting these little proof sentences in as you go.
Well, it's normally at the end. Again, the framework that you see on the screen, challenges, impact. What if you could do this? Well, you can, and here's the proof statement. That's normally where it would show up. There are, again, I've gotten questions. Well, shouldn't you offer some proof up front to build credibility? You can. Again, if you're just using the one sentence model that was described earlier, but I think the challenge is sometimes sales reps take some creative license with that sentence and get into a long conversation of, hey, let me tell you all the wonderful things we did with this company. And 10 minutes later, they're still talking about that company. And the poor prospect is thinking, what does this mean to me? And I don't get it.
That could be when you get into those, well, what do you guys actually do scenarios?
Right.
Yeah. Cool.
All right. So let's bring it all together. So what you've heard, here are the steps that you walk through in this checklist. So after the introduction, state the common goals that exist for the persona or the role that you're communicating with. Elaborate on their challenges. Telegraph to them, hey, here's what those challenges mean. And then take the opportunity there to ask the question, hey, these are the challenges and the impact that we're hearing from other executives like yourself. I'm really curious, what does that look like in your world? And again, use those impact questions to deepen their understanding, let them experience the emotion of what's going on in their world, then paint a picture of a better tomorrow, and then offer just a succinct proof statement that allows them to understand and know, hey, we've done this before. So when your reps deliver a conversation that starts with the prospect hearing about their goals and challenges, it demonstrates that your reps are established as an expert. So you build credibility right up front. When your reps talk about the impact of those challenges and they're drawing the prospect in to identify their unique challenges by asking, hey, what does this look like in your world? The reps are demonstrating empathy and the conversation becomes memorable. And then when your reps finally, when they deliver instant contrast by a series of what if you could or imagine if you could statements, your reps are leveraging how the human brain perceives value. And so finally, they put icing on the cake with a one-sentence case study, effectively proving the ability to accomplish what you just held out. The result, tremendous high perceived value that carries you into the next conversation. And that's what we were able to accomplish with one of our clients. They saw a 580% increase in their conversion rate. So it was a SaaS company. They were spending $250,000 on leads and salaries for their BDR team. The problem was they were only converting about 8% of those qualified leads into the next stage of their sales process. So we created a first call playbook. We certified their reps on their ability to execute on their playbook, which that's a huge step. I mean, it's one thing to create a playbook, but the proof in the pudding is you got to get the reps to embrace it, use it, and demonstrate to leadership, hey, I can do this. Mm-hmm. And so they went from 8% to 47% in just one quarter. That's a 580% increase in their conversion rate. Huge game changer. Hey, here's the good news. Every one of you have the opportunity to do the same thing.
I love it. That's awesome. And so how do you then, this is a question from myself, how do you certify your reps? So you've built this wonderful playbook. It's fantastic. You give it to all of them. You say, hey, you've got to read this by Friday. What sort of steps are you putting in place? Are you making them do demos to their peers? Can you walk me through how you certify? Because it's awesome.
Yeah.
Amazing the result.
No, there's two ways. And I'll use analog and digital as the way to describe it. Yeah. So the analog way to certify is what we did in this particular case. And that is each of the reps had to sit with the sales leader and myself and role play this conversation. And so the sales leader actually played the role of a typical prospect. And then the sales rep had to interact with the sales leader just like they would a prospect. My role was just to sit there and make sure they're tracking against the playbook. Yes, they're able to execute this. So they have an opportunity to do that and practice that leading up to the certification where they actually role play with the sales leader. At that point, the sales leader gives them the stamp of approval and they're off. And he even went the extra mile. He said, until you certify, you're not getting any more leads. So there was there was a high level of pain associated with you got to get this right. Now, so that's the analog way. The digital way, there are some technology platforms out there, and we use one called Refract TV, mm-hmm. and it allows us to build a dynamic role play conversation on a technology platform. So the rep calls in and is having an artificial role play conversation where we've already scripted typical responses in that type of conversation, and it's recording how they respond and whether or not they're tracking against the playbook, and also gives them the ability to see a report, who talked the most, did I achieve that, that 37-63% magical split where the prospect's talking 63% of the time and I'm talking 37% of the time. So there is technology out there that can be used to certify the reps as well.
I love it. Awesome. Well, yeah, that fantastic presentation. I'm excited to get to some of these questions. Thanks everyone for your overwhelming amount of questions throughout. It's fantastic to see. So David, if you're open to it, we got about 12 minutes here. We just dive into them.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. Okay, so we have Tess O'Brien wants to know, what is a reasonable goal for first call conversion rate? Is there a benchmark? What do you typically see in your experience?
Yeah, that's a hard one to answer because conversion rates are impacted by other factors than just how well you've executed the call.
Right.
Some of it could be, again, the quality of the lead. Some of it could be the technology or the product or service that you sell. So, I mean, I'll brag on our team. We have about a 90 to 95% conversion rate on our first calls, which I guess you would expect that because that's our forte, right?
That's your sauce,
Yeah. But a more reasonable conversion rate would be in the 30 to 40% range.
Got it. All right, another great question. This one's comes from Klaus Folk again, so kind of a follow-up question. I like this one. So how does your model work for startups whose biggest challenge is to get the first few sales under their belt? So maybe the proof section is missing at the moment.
Great question. And again, I've had the experience of answering that question. Living here in Atlanta, have been an advisor down at Atlanta Tech Village for 4 years now. So I've had the opportunity to work with young technology companies, young startups. And so here's how you do that. You're not going to be communicating what you've done for another company. At that point, because you're a startup and you don't have existing clients, you really are going to have to demonstrate to them how your product works as the proof source. So a proof source, it actually can be a demo, right? You know, if you're selling software, they're going to want you to demonstrate to them that what you just this picture that you just painted is true. And so for a startup, you're going to have to lean heavily on that. You're going to have to go, hey, what if you could do this? What if you could do this? What if you could do this? You can, and here's how. Let me show you very quickly. It's these three things. Let's schedule another meeting where I can give you a demonstration as to how this is going to work in your world to get this picture that I painted.
Got it. That makes sense. So even a demo or something like a trial, those could all be proof sources because you're actually showcasing the, what it can do in their world.
Yeah, absolutely.
Makes total sense. Okay, this is from Victor Barton. Would you recommend using this same kind of roadmap to craft introductory emails when you're reaching out to new prospects? Can you overlap the two a little bit?
Yeah, so kudos for this individual recognizing that. The format that you've just experienced can be used in all types of communication. It can serve as a format for your website. So if you're a startup, again, don't create a website of here's everything we do. Create a website that really does paint a picture of, hey, these are the things that are going on in your world. What if your world could look like this? So the structure that you see can be used in just about any communication. It can be an elevator pitch. It could be an email. It could be a voicemail that you're leaving in your your BDR attempts. And the reason that it works is because of the creating of the contrasting worldview. So in an email, you're communicating, hey, these are typical challenges that we see in your world. What if your world could look like this? Hey, let's schedule 15 minutes and we'll have a conversation as to how that can happen. Again, great question.
I love it. Very cool. So yeah, it kind of transcends not just sales conversations. This is more, behavior psychology that can really go on any form of communication. I like it.
Yeah.
Another question from Tess O'Brien here. She is curious about ways of presenting the better tomorrow that doesn't come across as like cheesy or fake. Like, imagine if all your problems went away. What's the best way to kind of do that seems natural?
Yeah, there's some people, the imagine if it feels that way. And again, I always tell sales professionals, don't use anything that you don't have 100% confidence in, because it'll just come out in a way that is not convincing, or it's not going to accomplish what you want to accomplish. So if you're uncomfortable with, hey, imagine if the world looks like this, just say, what if you could? Or you could just say, hey, instead of these challenges and the impact, you can do this instead, and you can do this, and you can do this. And here's why, and here's how, and then you get into the proof source. So a you can statement, or you can do this, not as cheesy. I don't know if that's the right word, as imagine if, but they both accomplish the same thing.
Right. So just playing around with the wording a little bit, make sure it's natural to you and sounds comfortable as the rep.
The important thing is using the word you, because what if you could, or imagine if you could, as soon as they hear the word you, they start living in the statement that you're making. And that's a big distinction between what if we could do this for you. So when you say what if we could do this, you're not talking about them, you're talking about you.
Right.
So it's really important to incorporate you or you phrasing in the front part of that statement.
Definitely making it about them. And okay, so we got another great question from Joe Papero. Thanks for the question, Joe. So I know a lot of what you discussed today is good for SaaS companies. Would you expect the same result if this roadmap was used for sales in a company providing a physical service? For example, I'm assuming, Joe, this is your company, investigation services for the legal industry. Would you expect the same result? I'm sure you've worked with all sorts of industries, David.
We have. Again, I mentioned technology. We work more with technology companies just because of the complexity of what they sell, and there typically is more value associated with messaging, when there's complexity. But the answer is yes. This framework is going to work for any product because it's based on behavioral psychology. So it doesn't matter if you're talking about a product or service. The way that we perceive value is we imagine this is where we are today and this is where we could be. It's why my dad, the very first big purchase I made was my first car, and I was having a real challenge. I was trying to decide between a Mazda RX-7 and a Volkswagen, which I know in today doesn't sound like much of a choice, but I'm trying to make this decision, and he goes, use the Ben Franklin method. And I said, what's that? And he said, get a piece of paper, draw a line down the middle, put all the pros on one side and the cons on the other, and you'll see this side-by-side contrast, and you'll be able to make a decision. So Ben Franklin, well before Daniel Kahneman, understood how human beings perceive value and used that in his decision-making.
Right. Yeah. So just on that piece of paper, it's the contrasting worldview in one piece of paper right there. So you can perceive that value. I like it. Awesome. Okay, so we probably have time, and Joe's jumping on saying thank you. So we probably have time for one more question. So we'll go with Noah, and this is a lot of processes, sales, discovery calls. They coach people to kind of build rapport up front. How do you coach people to build rapport on this discovery call? Is it front loaded? Is it throughout? What are your views on that?
Yeah, so one of the things that you heard throughout this webinar is that if you're communicating about their world, if you're painting this contrasting worldview of this is what your world looks like today and this is what your world looks like with our product or service, when you're talking about challenges in their world, goals in their world, you're talking about the emotion of the impact in their world, guess what you're doing? You're building rapport.
Right.
You absolutely are. You're building rapport in a way that actually has more value than the typical, hey, are you a golf fan or are you a football fan? And again, I'm not speaking down on that. There is an opportunity in the introduction to build that kind of rapport. Where do you live? Tell me a little bit about your family. I get that. But it's more important to stay consistent in talking about their world, because you instantly are building rapport because you're talking about them, not talking about you.
Makes complete sense. I love it. Okay, and we have one more. We've got so many good ones. I might have to just keep you here all day, David.
No, that's fine.
And you're such a good sport for answering. I feel like I'm just peppering you, but it's some great insight. So Carlota Sabino wants to know, so just out of curiosity, have you worked with sales teams outside of the US, like Europe, for example, where this discovery roadmap has been adopted and worked well? I ask because most of my customers already seem to know what they want. They have a list of requirements, and stating their goals rather than just listening to what they want seems contradictory.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'm going to answer it in two parts. Number one, human behavior is human behavior regardless of where you live on the planet. Yeah. So people are going to perceive in Europe, they're going to perceive value based in understanding this contrasting worldview. If somebody gets on the phone with you and they have a checklist of what they want, go ahead and acknowledge it and just consider it as table stakes for potentially doing business with you. But don't back away from, so what are the challenges that you're facing that led you to the things that you want? What are the impact of those challenges? And then what's the outcome that you're looking for? So I think there's a way to steer the conversation. Just go ahead and tip your cap to, yeah, no, absolutely, I get it. The things that you're articulating, they're important. I get that. But help me understand how you got there so I can be more responsive to painting this picture of our uniqueness and, more importantly, what that means to you and what your world would look like in doing business with us.
I love it. Well, David, you're an absolute wealth of knowledge, and like I said, I wish I could steal you for the rest of the day and just keep these coming. But I think we're at time. So again, thank you everyone for the amazing interaction throughout. And before I let you go, David, just for those people that don't know about master messaging, how do you help sales teams today?
We help them to increase revenue in ways that are predictable, replicable, and scalable. And again, one of the primary vehicles that we use to do that is a sales conversation playbook. So we focus today on the first conversation and discovery call, but
Yep.
we actually create playbooks, very unique playbooks for each of our clients that covers discovery, covers demonstration, covers proposal, and all the other expanded conversations. So that's what we do. And before we sign off, let me say this. We'd love to hear from the audience. We know that creating the messaging and structure of a complete first call playbook, it's hard. And so as you step into the exercise, we'd love to offer any assistance that we can. So don't hesitate to reach out and we can continue this conversation.
Awesome. And the best way to get a hold of you then, David, is just the email there, dkirkgen@mastermessaging.com.
That's it.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, David, thank you again for your time and insight. It was a great conversation, and thanks everyone who tuned in, and have a great day.
Thanks, guys.